Thank you for joining us today for the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. I'm Jay Jones, and I'm here with George Mays. It's time for Text Driven Tuesday. Grab your Bibles. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, everyone's favorite topic, talking about sex today.
Yep.
And we know, George, that I have a goal of making you blush
Yeah.
every podcast.
Mm.
And I'm guessing I'm going to get more than one today.
You think so?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Got some stuff planned.
I don't really have anything planned. One thing I did have planned, George, and I totally failed. I told our community group I was going to do it, so sorry I let you guys down. But I wanted to find one of those, like, because you said sex probably at least 1,000 times in the sermon. I was going to count, and then I was like, I'm not counting this. Like, you know those preachers, they like do that huffing?
Mm.
And the Lord said,
Yeah.
and they huff.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to find one that said a sexa, and I was going to put it on the button, you know, where I put these things, where I have these little buttons.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like I need one of those for this particular.
What's wrong with you people?
Sexa.
We probably
But,
could use that one a couple
Man,
of
it
times
was a
today.
failure. Yeah, I completely dropped the ball on that.
Yeah.
But
That's a shame. That's
yeah,
a real
it
shame.
would have been good. Would have been a good one. So
Yeah.
we are recording on some new podcast equipment. So we want to say thank you to Wayne and Larry for setting all this stuff up and being so generous. These are legit. This is legit stuff right here, buddy. These microphones are so sensitive.
Yeah.
And hopefully people can hear the difference. I saved opening this because I want to.
Oh, did you want to open it?
Listen to how good the microphone captures me opening this. Wayne brought this drink from Mexico, Jarritos Tamarind. I don't know what it is, but listen to this. Ooh. You hear that?
I heard it.
Yeah. I don't know what this drink is, but I still don't know. It tastes like a white Jolly Rancher.
A what?
Yeah. Pina colada, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
A white Jolly Rancher.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd forgotten what it was like to hear out of both.
Oh, you got both?
Both
You got
sides of
audio on
that.
both those now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice and cozy.
Mm-hmm.
We have more room now. So we have room now, actually, we can have 2 guests on here.
Yeah.
So we'll have to plan a special podcast
Hey,
now.
we probably could even set it up where we could get 5.
Maybe. Yeah, depending how close we get in here.
Yep.
We do an elder episode where all the elders are on here at the same time.
Oh, goodness.
It'll be fun times. Well, we want to jump into the sermon, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I'll have you read in a second, but if you're just now kind of getting into the podcast this summer, we have been rotating through preaching. A different pastor of our church has been preaching a different area, and it's all related to the Christian family. So that was the idea, is we wanted to zero in on some things that could be beneficial and helpful to people. And this week we came to marriage and sex,
Mhm.
sex in marriage. And so that's what we're talking about today. And we got a text for that. God does.
Yeah, there's, growing up, I don't think I ever heard any sermon that was really direct about the sexual relationship.
Mm-hmm.
My youth group had you got the obligatory youth lesson
Mm-hmm.
on sex, but it's more of don't do this.
Right.
Not really a theology of sex. Don't really remember hearing about it at home. Probably learn more about sex from people at school.
At school. Yeah.
But there is a text. God's word does talk about sex,
Mm-hmm.
and so we don't have to be ashamed about it. We don't have to pretend like sex doesn't exist. The world talks about it. The world talks about it really brazenly and unashamedly.
Right.
And Christians, for some reason, we talk about it like it's dirty.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's like probably if the world had a theme, like if you're an alien and you're visiting planet Earth and
Uh-huh.
you're like looking at humanity, you're like, what is the theme of planet Earth? They're probably gonna be like it's sex. They're obsessed with sex.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We have to talk about sex because the world is talking about sex. It is the issue in our culture. I mean, everything that is going wrong with our culture is all related to sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it's um, pornography, just fornication,
Mhm.
adultery,
Mhm.
homosexuality, transgender stuff, all the identity stuff,
Yeah.
um, abortion.
Right.
It's all tied to sex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can't get away from it. I keep seeing Protestia. We've shown some videos from Protestia. Um, they keep showing videos from. I don't think it's United Methodist, but I could be wrong because it seems like something United Methodist would do. Talking about like what was it? Ethical non-monogamy,
Yeah.
like polyamory.
Yeah. Yeah. They're just trying to go Roman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, polygamy is going to be a thing, I'm sure. It's
yeah.
I mean it's
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
Our culture is just everything is about sex.
Yeah, I'm never going to go on a cruise, but I'll see videos people post. They're on cruises and they'll like walk down the hallways and they'll like look at all the doors
Mm-hmm.
and there'll be upside down pineapples.
Yeah.
When people go on these cruises. That means that they're swingers.
Right.
But it's always in the videos.
Mm.
There's always like swingers
Really.
putting their pineapples on the doors and stuff.
Mm.
Well, we may think, okay, our culture's really messed up on sex, but
Do we need like a parental warning on this?
I think
this
they
episode?
they probably got them. They probably were able to discern.
Yeah.
Probably able to discern
Now all
that.
the kids know what an upside down pineapple.
Well, you were
is.
preaching for 5 minutes. You were preaching for 5 minutes, no kidding. And Evangeline, she turns and she's like, "What's sex?"
Yeah.
And we're like, "Oh." She's 6 years old, so
Uh-huh.
I'm like, "We'll talk about it later."
Yeah.
Yeah. And she forgot.
Okay.
But she'll bring it up when she remembers.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're going to have to talk to your kids about it sometime.
Right. I tried to give the parents of our church a heads up by posting my sermon outline on the app
Mhm.
earlier in the week,
Yeah.
so that they would know what was coming up and what direction we were going. But for like visitors, sorry.
Yeah.
It-
Welcome to Christ Fellowship Church. Yeah. Well, we'll jump in. We'll have you read the text here in a second, but before we do, maybe it's helpful to understand a little bit about the Roman culture, a little bit about the church at Corinth, because I think we can think, well, our culture is the most messed up culture on sex ever, and I mean, we
Yeah.
probably maybe are because of the trans stuff, but
Mhm.
the Roman culture was very different from ours, very sexual, like liberal.
Mm.
A lot of, I mean, there were no rules. Like, I mean, it's wild stuff. So, like, if you're a Roman citizen,
They probably, I would say that our culture probably is worse than the Roman culture because the Roman culture at least saw the value of marriage.
right?
Even if they distorted it,
Mm-hmm.
they still like marriage was still a good thing for the cult, for the society,
Right.
for the empire.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas our culture,
Doesn't view it as anything.
yeah, marriage
Yeah.
marriage isn't really that valuable.
Right. So Christianity comes to Corinth, and in Corinth, you would have people. I mean, can't say it for sure, but if this church is any reflection of Corinth and the surrounding society, you could be married, and your wife was, she was for procreation
Mhm.
and for like family stability and for probably property and things like that for
Mhm.
passing down a
Right.
legacy. And then you probably had like a body slave.
Like alliances,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
build up alliances with other families.
Mm-hmm. the man had a woman for pleasure
Mhm.
that wasn't his wife, and probably too the wife had a different man.
Yeah.
And or they may have men for pleasure, and the women may have women for pleasure. Like it was
Mhm.
very wild.
Right.
And so when Paul
They'd,
is,
they'd have cult prostitution.
yeah,
Go.
They-
Part of their worship would be go to pagan temples, and there's cult prostitutes.
yeah, and that would be like kind of their form of pornography too. You go observe, watch.
Mhm.
So when Paul writes these things about,
You can still go to Pompeii. They've got pornography.
Yeah, the
all over
paintings.
yeah.
yeah, the murals,
Mhm.
yeah. So the writings of the Bible into that time are they're very radical. When he talks about, which we already discussed this, wives or husbands loving their wives like Christ loved the church. A Roman man was not expected to love his wife,
Mhm.
and now we have instructions regarding sex given to the Corinthians. So tell us a little bit about what we need to know background wise about the Corinthian church, and then we'll have you read it.
How long we got?
I think one time you said the Corinthian church may be a church you'd visit, but not one maybe you want to join.
Yeah, you don't want to join the Corinthian church. Yeah, I would say that the Corinthian church is probably the most messed up church in the New Testament that we're reading about.
Yeah.
Because of everything that is wrong with the church. I mean, they're splitting into factions. Like, talk about divisions in the church. They're dividing over who's their favorite preacher. Trying to one up each other. They're suing each other, taking each other to court. Really, the overarching, I think, theological problem in Corinth is they've got like this hyper spirituality, and it's over-realized eschatology. Like they're taking some good teachings, good theology, and they're overextending it and acting like they're already there, like they're already in the eschaton. And it's influenced by Greek philosophy that views the body as bad, going back to at least Plato, who said that the body is a prison that you're trying to escape. And you'll see that in Corinth, especially chapter 15. They've got bad theology about the resurrection. There is no bodily resurrection. Why would you want a bodily resurrection? You're trying to escape the body. They're still going to pagan temples. And then we see that they've got sexual immorality. The worst is in chapter 5. There's a guy who has his father's wife, maybe a stepmom. But there's also prostitution. They're going to the temple prostitutes. And then here in chapter 7, they've got some marriage problems.
Yeah.
So just a long list.
Yeah.
Of stuff that is wrong in Corinth.
Yeah.
Which makes Paul's greeting to them in chapter 1 all the more powerful, because he addresses them as saints, as those that God is going to sanctify. He's going to bring them to completion. It should give us some hope for churches,
Right.
Modern churches.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not Corinth, so there's hope for us.
Yeah.
If there's
Yeah,
hope
yeah.
for Corinth, then there's hope for us.
Yeah. And maybe you're a pastor and you're struggling in your ministry. A good pick me up is you can say, at least I'm not the pastor at Corinth.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's have you read the passage and then we'll jump in.
Okay. So we're looking at chapter 7, verses 1 through 11. It says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife.
Okay. Good. Thanks for reading that. All right, so let's jump in. You have four points for us to go through today, and they're 4 biblical truths about sex, if you're taking notes as you follow along. So let's look at the first one. Number 1, sex in marriage is good.
There we go. We can go.
Yeah.
We can go to the second point.
Yeah, second point. Sex in marriage is good. So it was interesting to hear some. You brought in a little bit more background on this point. That there were people who, like you said, viewed like the body as bad, and so they had adopted this kind of asceticism, and
Yeah.
they were like, "We shouldn't have sex in marriage."
Right.
Seems weird.
It does seem weird.
Seems super weird. But
Mm.
we're talking about our community group, and I didn't remember it when you were preaching, but I was in it, and I've never met someone like this since. But I met a guy who kind of had this view.
Really?
Yeah, and had professed to be a believer. This was I hadn't been a Christian very long, maybe a year, and he's like, no, sex is only for having a baby, so you should never have sex unless you're trying to have a baby.
Mm.
And I was like, I don't believe you're right. This is this is weird. This is strange. And I haven't encountered it since. But apparently it still hangs around.
Okay.
You ever hear that?
I mean, probably in the more like ultra conservative churches.
Mm.
I don't. I'm sure there's some like IFB churches or like Pentecostal holiness churches that might hold to something like this.
Hmm.
I mean, there were. I'm trying to find it, but there were people that were teaching this in probably Ephesus. I can't remember where it is, but he talks about how nothing that God creates is bad, but
Mhm.
there are teachers that are saying, don't eat this kind of food.
Right. Don't touch.
Don't touch.
Yeah.
So there's some people that are doing this in the early church. That are teaching this in the early church, but then the early church fathers themselves were real bad, like real bad on this.
Yeah, you'd send me a few crazy
yeah.
things you found.
I was talking to one of our members. He really likes the early church fathers too, and he said you can go to the early church fathers on pretty much everything else,
Yeah.
not on this, because they are probably influenced by the same Greek philosophy that the Corinthians are being influenced by. A lot of these early church fathers were Greek philosophers before they converted.
Mm.
And they often would bring that philosophy into Christianity. I think especially of Justin Martyr. He was a big-time Greek philosopher. And so they would say things like the sexual relationship is for procreation, but beyond that, husband and wife should live together as brother and sister.
Yeah, super weird.
One of them, I don't know how in depth do we want to go?
Are you making your own self blush?
No, one of the guys he said that the farmer doesn't plant seed on top of seed.
Okay.
So,
Huh.
and he was not alone like that. Like it wasn't just some outliers. Like I found Clement of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Tertullian was influenced by the Montanists, and they're like the early church charismatics. They believe that the end of the world was
Right.
like any time,
Uh-huh.
and so why would you get married?
Yeah.
That they were considered they were deemed as heretics.
They had Trinitarian heresies too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But think of the charismatic movement. Like they were the early charismatics. Um, like real important figures in early church history are
you-
saying these things.
Do you know if were they married?
As far as I know, they were all single.
Yeah. That's probably why they believe that.
Maybe.
Yeah. Get married would fix that for them real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So the early church, they were not getting it right either. And they were often they kept coming back to the same verse, chapter 7, which is all about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But verse 29, Paul says, "The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none."
Mm.
And so they took that verse and they said, well, even if you're married, you should live together like you're not married.
Weird.
Which they take it out of the context. Calvin and Matthew Henry and John Gill are much better when they're looking at this entire chapter, really, than the early church was. But that's what they would appeal to. But they obviously were not looking at the beginning of chapter 7,
Right.
because Paul is very clear on what the marriage relationship should look like here in these early verses.
Yeah.
So you can't take verse 29 and say this trumps these verses.
Right.
They they have to mean something in the context that isn't contradictory.
Yeah. And you said he's likely writing to a response to something they had written him. Like, we don't have that letter. There's also a missing Corinthian letter, right?
1 Corinthians is actually 2 Corinthians.
Right.
And 2 Corinthians is actually 4 Corinthians.
Yeah, we're missing.
So we're missing at least 2 letters to the Corinthian church that Paul mentions.
Yeah.
He mentions writing to them in 1 Corinthians. In chapter 5, verse 9, he talks about the letter that they wrote to him. Then 1 Corinthians is his letter back to them. Then in 2 Corinthians, he talks about the, what's he call it? The painful letter.
Mm-hmm.
I think he calls it the painful letter, which could be 1 Corinthians, but it seems like it's another letter. And so there's probably at least 4 letters.
Yeah. So writing back and
but
forth.
they're writing back and forth. And they're writing to him, and it seems like they're making some assertions, some theological assertions, maybe some pushback against Paul's first letter. And so he's writing 1 Corinthians in response to that letter.
Yeah.
And you can see it in chapter 7, verse 1, now concerning the matters about which you wrote. And then the ESV and the Christian Standard Bible have it in quotation marks. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. They're the only 2 translations that have it in quotation marks. And so a lot of the early commentators, they think that that's Paul's position also. But I think that given the context and the introduction in verse 1, I think that the ESV and Christian Standard Bible get it right by putting quotation marks around that. I think that's the Corinthian assertion that Paul's responding to.
Yeah, and so they wrote, it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman.
Or literally touch.
Yeah.
It's good for a man not to touch a woman.
So that's what they wrote to him. And then he responds by telling them that may be true, but not in marriage.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, but in marriage, because of temptation to sexual morality, each man should have his own wife and each her own husband.
Which
affirming the goodness of...
Yeah. Which is, in the plural, sexual immoralities, which we see in Corinth. Their bad theology here in practice are probably the catalyst for what he's talking about in chapters 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Like they've got bad theology really about the body, but about sex within marriage. And you can imagine, like, this married couple. The wife is now, pursuing like this hyper spirituality. We can't have sex anymore. We're Christians. And the husband's like, I guess I'll go to the temple. I guess I'll go to the temple prostitutes.
Probably not a good evangelistic technique.
Probably not.
If your husband's not a believer, hey, I found Christ. I became a Christian. And it's good news for you because we're not having sex anymore. You want to become a Christian too?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably not great. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't go to the youth rally and be like, become a Christian. You'll never have sex. Yeah, that's
right.
You're probably right. But they're saying it's good for a man not to touch a woman, which is contrary to God's word.
Yeah.
You go back to Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
and God makes everything very good. The first time we see something that's not good is when God himself says it's not good for man to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
I will make a helper suitable for him or corresponding to him. He builds a wife for Adam, presents her to him, I guess performs the first marriage ceremony. And then Moses comments and says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.
Yeah.
And the man and his wife were naked and unashamed.
Mm.
And that's all within the context of this very good. And so the marriage relationship, which has to include the sexual relationship, if we're going to call it one flesh, then it has to include that. And it's very good. And so the Corinthians, their assertion that it's not good is contradicting what God himself says in Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going to cause all kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And I made the assertion in the intro, if you're having marriage problems, then you're probably having sex problems.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably having issues in the sexual relationship. And if you're having problems in the sexual relationship, I can pretty much guarantee you're having marriage problems.
Yeah.
Because it's and we'll see that the sexual relationship is not what marriage is all about. That's not the thing. But it is an integral part of the marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've done some counseling. I've done some counseling. You probably have never encountered a marriage that was not going well, and then you asked them a sex question, and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's good. We have regular
Right.
sex."
Right.
It's always we don't, or very rarely.
Mm.
Right.
Paul Tripp. Look at this. I got like an appendix to my sermon.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of
all
quotes.
these quotes that I just didn't have time for. Paul Tripp. He says, what diverts and destroys physical sexuality is a lack of love. If your spouse hasn't loved you outside the marriage bed, why would you think that she would love you when you are in the marriage bed?
Mm.
So you can't disconnect the two.
Right.
If you're having problems in one area, you're having problems in a bunch of other areas.
Yeah. It is, and like if you have a healthy sexual relationship and it's regular, it's pretty hard to stay mad at each other. Like you can't be like fighting with each other and then sleeping in the same bed every night together. Like it kind of fixes itself if you sleep in the same bed and you're laying down and you got to go to bed like next to each other. Usually someone's going to be like, I'm sorry. Like cuz you have that type of intimacy and you're close.
Right. Well, it's because that one flesh unit is more than just physical.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're emotionally going to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to mentally be connected. The sexual relationship is a means by which the husband and wife are growing closer together. And that's why it's so important. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. It's so important to keep sex in marriage,
right?
Because if you are having sex with a bunch of people, you cannot help but for that to be a part of the action. That
Right.
That spiritual and emotional and mental aspect is there, even if you are just treating sex casually.
We might need to save it for the other point, but even I think psychologists will recognize what we would call as a spiritual thing, that if you have sex with someone, there's something beyond just a purely physical thing that's happening to you.
Yeah.
Now they would try to describe it in a purely materialistic sense and psychologically, but we know that it's a spiritual linking that is happening to two people. And we'll talk about that when we get to point 3, I think.
Yeah.
So we're ready for point 2?
Sure.
Or do you have more you want to comment on that?
No, I mean we see Proverbs, Song of Solomon, like
Yeah, it was
the
good. Why don't
the
you read?
Bible.
Do you want to read? You had because you said Christians can be prudish.
Mm.
I don't think we should be more prudish than Solomon was in the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs.
Right.
And you should read it because I think it kind of shows how a husband should really delight.
Mm.
Like he should really be intoxicated with
That's what.
his wife,
Yeah,
not
that's-
other women.
Right.
His wife should be intoxicating to him and a delight to him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very good a portion of scripture that you read.
That I mean that's Solomon.
Yeah.
Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 5, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed. He's using poetic language
Right.
to talk about the sexual relationship. He's using this idea of a fountain as the sexual relationship. Should your water just go throughout all the streets? Like, should you be promiscuous? And he says instead, let it be for yourself. Let your fountain be blessed. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love.
Mm-hmm.
Like, be drunk with love for your wife.
Yeah.
Now, the early church would often try to get away from this stuff like Song of Solomon
Mm-hmm.
by using allegory.
Right.
And so they try to find like hidden spiritual meanings behind the plain meaning.
Right.
And so Song of Solomon is no longer about a husband and wife. It's about Christ and the church. It gets really weird if you go that direction, I think, because the language, I mean, sometimes the plain reading of the text is just the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to look at that passage in Proverbs and say that that's anything other than love your wife, enjoy your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be an adulterer. Don't be promiscuous.
Right.
Like, be intoxicated with your wife. There's no hidden spiritual meaning behind that. Solomon means what he says.
No hidden spiritual meaning, but a very spiritual meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So very good. All right. Number 2. So we're going 4 biblical truths about sex. Number 1, sex in marriage is good. Number 2, sex is for your spouse's good, verses 3 through 5.
Yep.
So you'll want to look at your Bible there and reference that. That's what we're talking about now. So he now talks about in 3 through 5 how the husband should give to to his wife her conjugal rights,
Mm-hmm.
and then the wife likewise should give conjugal rights to her husband, because you don't own your body anymore.
Right.
It belongs to your spouse.
Yep.
And you should not have seasons where you're not having sex. There are very strict parameter where that would be okay, and even then it's for a limited time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the clear meaning, is that, yes, okay, sex in marriage is good, but now we're going a step further. It's now for your spouse's good, which makes it about the other person.
Right. You owe a debt to
Yeah.
your spouse.
Yeah.
That's what the word
That's-
conjugal right. It's really this Greek word that means like a debt that's owed.
Yeah, it's like a duty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
You owe a
give
duty.
to your, and it goes both ways, which is very countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
The wife owes her husband his due,
Mm-hmm.
but the husband owes to his wife her due also. Which we already talked about that in the Greek and Roman culture, that didn't play any role in the marriage.
Yeah.
Like they did it for status, and they did it for heirs.
Mm-hmm.
Like pleasure, satisfaction, you can get that somewhere else.
Yeah.
that was not part of the thought process.
Right. Right.
But Paul, he says that you owe each other the sexual relationship.
Mm.
So don't defraud each other, he says in verse 5.
Yeah.
It's the same word that he uses over in chapter 6 when he's talking about lawsuits. Like they're defrauding each other by taking each other to court and cheating each other.
Right.
Don't cheat your spouse. Like, give to your spouse what is owed to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea of serving each other. We talk about this in every other aspect. As Christians, we're supposed to serve others. We're supposed to lay down our own rights. We're supposed to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, die to ourselves, be sacrificial. Why wouldn't that apply to the bedroom also? Like that's really what's at the heart of these verses.
Mm-hmm.
Is love your spouse and be selflessly giving to your spouse.
Right.
Now we can twist these.
Yeah.
I mean, guys can twist this probably more than women and demand sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like Paul says it.
Yeah.
You have to do it because Paul says it.
Yeah.
But if we're going that route, we're missing the whole point of what Paul is saying. It's about serving.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about taking. It's about giving.
Yeah.
We aren't owed something selfishly. We owe it to the other person.
Yeah.
To serve.
Yeah.
One of our members was telling me about a Costi Hinn sermon on this,
Mm-hmm.
and he said something like, if you're the eager partner, then try to be less eager. And if you're less eager, the less eager partner, try to be more eager.
Mm.
And in that way, serve each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because men and women are different.
Yeah. Usually it's like, obviously it's the man who would be more, like you say, to abuse it, to say, this is what is owed to me.
Right.
Like, this is your duty,
Mm-hmm.
which is not how you want to treat your spouse anyway. Right. And the wife's way of kind of abusing this is to leverage sex as a weapon.
Right.
Where if you aren't doing what I want you to do, I'm going to withhold this from you.
We see the way that this is twisted. Just watch a sitcom.
Right.
Just watch any sitcom that has a married couple, and you'll see this.
Mm.
You got the dopey husband who just wants to have sex all the time with his wife.
Right.
And you've got the often, I don't know, bossy wife, I guess, kind of the sitcom trope, who leverages sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like a reward or a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way that we shouldn't be using each other.
Right.
Right. We're called to serve each other.
Right.
And that would carry over into the bedroom.
Right.
Right.
Well, you have to make yourself so delicious. You want to read that quote?
Oh my goodness.
If for the husbands, you just make it your aim to be so delicious.
I showed you this. I showed you this quote, and I said I'm not using this in the sermon at all.
But yeah, I mean, I think if you go back to the earlier sermons, if a husband loves his wife like Christ loves the church, I've yet to see, since like I'm at around 15 years in ministry, it's not a problem. Like women like men who love them like Christ loved the church. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they more easily fall into, I think, obeying these type of scriptures when they have a husband who they know really loves them and cares for them, and isn't selfish and isn't demanding. It seems to just work.
Yeah. Can't make a universal statement. I mean, there are situations. We can talk about that a little bit, I guess. But yeah, if we're striving to serve one another, then this will kind of work itself out.
Yeah.
This is C.J. Mahaney. Is C.J. Mahaney still someone?
Oh,
that
I thought you were pulling from a Puritan when I
No,
thought you
no.
sent me one where it's like be delicious.
No, this is C.J. Mahaney.
Okay.
I don't
All
know.
right,
Is C.J.
all right.
Mahaney still someone that we
I
can
don't know.
that we can talk about?
I didn't know that was in the that was the quote from from him.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah. Yeah. See, I was excited about that quote because I thought,
because you thought it was a Puritan,
and because the
Wow.
Puritans have a bad reputation for being prudes, though they weren't. You had found that wild that story where they church disciplined a guy.
Yeah, there's a story of some Puritan church disciplining a guy out of the church because he hadn't had sex with his wife for 2 years.
Yeah.
That there is this myth, I guess, of the Puritans being prudes,
Mm.
of not wanting to talk about sex,
Mm.
but it really couldn't be any further from the truth. I do have a quote from a Puritan. I don't know who the Puritan is. It's anonymous.
Okay.
But this Puritan said, "Married couples may joyfully give due benevolence one to the other." That's their word for sex. As two musical instruments rightly fitted do make a most pleasant and sweet harmony in a well-tuned concert.
Maybe someone can find out who said that. Put it in the comments.
Yeah.
Guess the Puritan.
Guess the Puritan. Yeah.
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 Well, let's. I don't know. We can talk about some practical things. I mean, this is. I think this is helpful. When people get married, like some problems usually come up, and it's regarding sex, and it looks something like this. They come in, and the wife is like, "All he wants is to have sex with me." Like I'm talking Christian couples, like probably didn't have sex before they got married. All he wants is to have sex. He doesn't care about anything else. He just wants me for that. And the guy's like, "No, that's not true. I really love you." Let's talk about how we work through that with somebody and how people can process that. So I think what's important, I think for young women to realize, and of course we've had talks with this about with our own daughter, is that if you marry a Christian man, he's been waiting. All right, right? He's been waiting for that, which
Right.
is, if he did, you found a good man. Because in today's day, that's tough to find.
Right.
And that's going to be a new thing and a very exciting for him. And that's not him using you. That's the way a man expresses like love toward his spouse. Like women can express love in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
But that's going to be normal, right? For the for that first like year of marriage, like it's going to be normal. And that's not you shouldn't view that as him using you. Now, the man's going to have to learn a little bit of maybe moderation,
Self-control
and moderation, and
loving your wife,
Yeah.
and serving your wife.
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to this passage.
Yeah.
Like, you're married. This is part of the marriage relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Serve one another.
Yeah.
And that can look like being more eager or less eager.
Yeah.
Right. And you eventually hit kind of a rhythm.
Right.
Where you start to learn each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it takes time.
Yeah. You don't want to. Women need to also understand, and I've heard my wife tell young women this: like, you are the only outlet that your husband has that is not sinful.
That is 1 Corinthians 7.
Right.
Like he says it. Verse 2, because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each wife should have her own husband. And then verse 5, don't deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, that's the sexual relationship, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control.
Right.
Like this isn't just opinions. This isn't worldly advice. It's what Paul is saying in the scriptures. This exactly right. Like um, instead of responding to your husband like he's some kind of mindless animal, recognize that he's pursuing you because you're the only one for him. Like he Proverbs chapter 5 tells the husband to be intoxicated
Mm-hmm.
by the love of his wife, and it's in the context of the sexual relationship. So recognize that that's a good thing.
Right.
Like he is drunk on your love.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And respond uh, by loving him back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Another a good thing that she learned, Angie was she stayed home for probably like around the first 10 years of her marriage. She was at home. Well, when I came home from working all day, she looked like she had made herself ready, like to look good for me.
Yeah.
Like she had regular clothes on. She had done her hair, and like so I came home to, good looking lady.
Yeah.
And a pastor's wife actually told that to her. She's like, your husband works. He's out in the world. He's around other women. When he comes home, you need to look good and presentable to him. Don't be, and it's tough, right? You got kids climbing all over you all day. You're cooking and cleaning, and you're cleaning the house. You're running errands. But is your husband, and you want to look good for your husband. You should, right? You shouldn't be sloppy. Like you shouldn't be a sloppy mess. Of course, there are times where that's going to
Jay's
happen.
email is
Yeah, you can email me because I got other practical tips that will help the ladies out too. So here's another good one. Okay, another good practical tip is they can feel overwhelmed by their young husband. So a good rule of thumb, and it's not like a contract, but the 48-hour rule.
I knew it was going to make an appearance.
You
I
knew
knew
it
it
was
was going
gonna
to
make
make
an
an appearance. Yeah.
I think the 48-hour rule is good. So you just tell, and like we've counseled young people, like, look,
I heard I heard someone tell me that you told them 72 hours, and I said I think that he's lowered the.
no, it was never 72
It's
hours.
never said.
I don't know where that came
You're
from.
you were real shocked there, Jay.
48 hours. 48-hour rule. So
Okay.
you get 48 hours when you're a young married couple. That's long enough, I think. Right now, everybody's different, but the idea is, like, don't have a long break so that there's not, and it's not always men. There are women that are more eager. You don't want to have her fall into temptation either.
Right.
So that's a good, reasonable thing. And I've actually heard of older people that have been married like a long time, like close to 40 years. And so I don't know where this originated. Probably some early, like Puritan. That's where I'm going to blame it. But I've heard about it through a different avenue of no connection to where I heard this from. And I'm like, these folks been married like 40-something years, and that's what they tell young people. So very interesting.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, that's again, we look back and I don't think you can look at verse 5 and come to any other interpretation than Paul is telling married couples to have sex frequently.
Yeah.
Like have sex often.
You said the more the better, didn't you?
I don't know if I said it in that way, but
you said the more the better, George. I'm pretty sure you did. You might have said some things. You were, when you're preaching, you said yesterday, you said the adrenaline takes over.
Maybe you're just hearing what you want to hear.
No, you told me. You said the adrenaline, you were nervous a little bit. The adrenaline kicked in. But let's not discount that the Spirit empowers the preacher. And I'm pretty sure you said the more the better.
Okay.
I'm receiving that as a word from the
Lord.
Lord.
You saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what Paul is telling married couples to do. And remember, they're in a pagan culture. They're surrounded by sex, just like we are. The temptation to sexual immoralities wasn't. I mean, just because they didn't have the internet doesn't mean that they weren't just absolutely surrounded by a culture that was obsessed with sex. We are too. We live in a culture that's just obsessed with sex.
Yeah.
because of the temptation of sexual immorality, have sex frequently with your spouse.
Right.
And
yeah.
I did say that Christians should have the best sex.
You definitely did say that.
I definitely said that.
Yeah,
because the world thinks that it's got it all figured out. Like, sleep around, have as many partners, as many conquests as you can get.
Yeah.
Right. Do whatever you want. It's free. You can do whatever, and you don't even have to worry about like consequences because you've got abortion and you've got all kinds of things. Right.
So,
but they're wrong. They're
yeah,
wrong. They
yeah.
they don't have it figured out because they've got it all twisted and distorted. And God's design is better.
Yeah.
God's design is for our good. It's not to steal our joy. It's to actually amplify our joy. And so
Yeah.
Christian couples should actually have the best sex.
Yeah, my community group, they honed in on that comment that you made.
Yeah.
And they're expecting me to now ask you for practical tips.
Yeah.
Huh?
What are you asking me, Jay?
Well, I'm not asking it.
Oh, other people are.
This is mainly at being asked to make you blush.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we knew it would make you blush.
Yeah.
But no, we did talk about it.
Some things are better left for the counseling room, Jay.
They are, yeah. Some things are better left for the counseling room.
I'm not Mark Driscoll over here.
Yeah, yeah. But we kind of talked about this, like you said this, and if you work like many of our folks do, they work around people who talk about this stuff, and, and if you're the Christian and you're in a group of guys, like it's gonna come out, right? They're gonna be like, "You've been married to the same woman for the past 10 years, and you've only had sex with one woman," and like, oh yeah,
right?
Like I got a different woman every week. Like I had an encounter like that, and I was able to switch it, to use it to as a way to evangelize this group of people. So it was in the army, it was in the reserves, and there was a guy. He was a philanderer and womanizer, and they were trying to make fun of me. And I was like, let me ask you a question. How many times do you think you've had sex? And he's like, whatever. He says it, and I'm like, okay, those are rookie numbers, buddy. Those are rookie numbers. I was like, you could probably have sex like 5 times a week for the rest of your life, and you're never going to catch me. You're never catching me, because if I only had sex with one woman, but I've been with this woman since I was 21 years old. And then I turned it, because you said should be better. And this is what people don't understand. Like if they're not Christians and they don't have a Christian marriage, we're doing something that God designed. So you're getting like a half version of sex. And I literally told him, and you can, if you don't want your kids to hear this, you can plug your kids' ears right now. I just said, look, you're using women like a sex doll. That's all they are to you.
Right.
It's not real
sex.
An
object.
It's not real sex.
Right.
You're not having real sex. What we have is what God designed, and it's more than a physical interaction. It's a spiritual, metaphysical thing that like transcends time and space. That's how I want to describe it.
Yeah.
And we had someone, and I don't want to tell who because I don't want to embarrass them, but they're a member of our church, and they have been married a long time, longer than us. Like we've been married over 20 years, both of us. And they said it keeps getting better.
Yeah.
They said it keeps getting better. And
those are the kinds of testimonies that you want to hear.
That's what you want to hear, George. Yeah. And that's what you want the young men in your church to hear.
Right.
My son heard it too. I was very glad that he did. And it's true because it's God's design, and it's so much better than the unbelieving world can understand. It's like they're getting like what is the soda? They're like getting Walmart brand soda, Kraft brand soda, Kraft brand mac and cheese, and we get
Mr. Pibb.
Yeah. And that's a good testimony, and you should not be ashamed to tell. Like if this comes up, you're not going to bring it up, but if they're going to try to make fun of you, you turn it on them.
Yeah.
You say, look, sex as God designed is so far much better, and you're missing out on the best that God has for your life by doing this way.
Right.
Now, they may not even be able to grasp that, right? And they'll probably laugh it off, and they'll be like, oh, whatever. You don't know. You're dumb because you've only had one woman, I'm sure is what they'll do. But it's going to stick in there. It's going to stick in their head, you know?
The Bible talks about sex, the sexual relationship, as the man knows his wife.
Mm-hmm.
He knew her. I don't think that's a one-time thing. I think it's this process of knowing your wife.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you're with her, the more you know her. And it gets better and better and better. I've got 2 quotes.
Yeah. Great value. We just got a
value.
note from our producer back
Great
here.
value.
Great
All right.
value brand sex. That's what you got.
I've got 2 quotes from Jim Neuheiser. He's a biblical counselor, and he wrote a book on marriage. And I like both of these quotes. One is about sexual intimacy, and one is about kind of a practical way of thinking about not abstaining.
Mm-hmm.
So in this one, he says it takes ongoing effort to maintain personal and sexual intimacy. Sex is exciting when it is new, which is why sexual sin, including affairs, can be alluring. But it takes commitment and grace to sustain a flourishing relationship, which is why affairs usually fizzle over time. God intends sex to be enjoyed in the secure context of a deep commitment to a lifelong covenant of companionship in which each partner serves and honors the other as each seeks to fulfill a God-given role. In this type of relationship, there is not the worldly pressure to perform to earn the devotion of the other. As a couple share life together and build an ever-deepening friendship, the sexual union comes to mean more and more. We see this beautifully described by the woman in the Song of Solomon, who relates her sexual desire for her husband to the friendship they enjoy. Quote, his mouth is full of sweetness, and he is wholly desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah.
But he's got this other one, and I had to share this one. I really enjoyed this one.
Okay.
All right. It says a final aspect to highlight is continuing to cultivate romance in your marriage. Many couples become so busy with career and children that they neglect each other. Some become lazy as they spend their free time with television, hobbies, or the internet while neglecting communication and romance. Some become sexually lazy as they wait until they are exhausted to go to bed and then don't want to put forth the effort to bring sexual happiness to each other. One wife realized that she would spend hours preparing healthy meals for her husband and would never dream of serving a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner, but she was convicted that she was often offering peanut butter and jelly sex. She resolved by God's grace to begin putting the same effort into their sexual relationship that she put into their meals.
Yeah.
So, just a practical application is don't get lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't, if you want your sexual relationship to be better, don't watch TV all night. Like, go to bed at a decent time.
Yeah.
Don't wait until it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and your spouse is exhausted.
Gonna get challenging when you start having kids.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It's gonna change everything.
Mm.
Gonna have to figure it out. But many people have before you, and you'll figure it out.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. But for sure it does. So don't and this can be a temptation for, I think, men to fall into resentment. Like, now my wife, all her time's with the kids. Naturally, that's what's supposed to happen. It's not always going to be like that. Yeah, now your wife's exhausted because she's been taking care of the kids and trying to. I mean, can you keep the house clean when you have kids? I'm not really sure.
I don't even know if it's possible.
I'm not really sure. I told Brooke about that. Brooke kind of likes clean. She likes to clean and stuff. And I'm like, look. And then she had an epiphany. She goes, yeah, I remember before Evangeline came, our house was pretty clean.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you guys were responsible for the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's normal.
Yeah.
And it's not always going to be like that.
Right.
Yeah, but it's going to change stuff. It's going to change the whole dynamic, and got to have grace and mercy, and don't be selfish.
don't be selfish.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, you kept bringing that up.
Mm.
This is not we want to have a non-selfish attitude.
Yeah.
And be very
If
graceful.
we're asking the question, well, how much sex are we supposed to have? How much sex do we have to have? Can I demand sex? Like, you're asking the wrong questions. Like, you're missing the whole point. And as I was studying, I was really struck by the fact that we often are viewing sex under the law. Like, I have to do this, or I've got to earn this. Like we were talking earlier about using sex as like a reward or a punishment. Like, that's law. We need to be viewing everything through the lens of the gospel. That's how we're supposed to live. I mean, that's what Philip was talking about last week with his sermon from Ephesians chapter 4 is that we're supposed to forgive each other as God in Christ forgave us.
Yeah.
Like, view this through the lens of the gospel. Why is the sexual relationship exempt from this? Like, why do we treat it as something different? Like, instead of viewing the sexual relationship through the lens of the law, view it through the lens of the gospel.
Right.
Like, love your spouse as Christ loved the church. Serve your spouse as the church is supposed to serve Christ, because of the gospel. Give to one another because God has given to you.
Yeah. Good. All right, point 3. So we've got 1, sex in marriage is good. 2, sex is for your spouse is good. 3, sex is a good gift only in marriage. This seems to be an obvious
yeah.
point. This seems to be an obvious point if you've read the Bible. Right.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's something to, I mean, in our culture, it's something that we have to reemphasize over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, we need to be convicted by this because pornography is an epidemic,
right?
Even in churches.
Yeah.
Just the temptation for sex before you're married.
Yeah.
I mean, we constantly are hearing stories of pastors that have had affairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious. Like, we know that this shouldn't be the case, and yet it is.
Right.
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 I don't know if it's because we are treating sex as law instead of pointing to the heart issue, or if we're just not talking about sex directly.
Right.
Like, we just kind of dance around it.
Yeah.
But we need to talk about it. We need to be just out in the open. Like, this is the design for sex. It's one man and one woman in the covenant of marriage for life. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All these sexual, I mean, it goes back to the last point of selfishness, because that's what all these sins are really highlighting, is our own selfishness.
Yes.
I mean, pornography is using other people for selfishness.
I met a man once, was not a believer, but he wasn't have sex with his wife because he was looking at porn all the time. And I was like, talk to me about that. And he's like, well, it's just easier. And I was like, I think I would take more of a direct approach today and like challenge his manhood. I think men need to be challenged.
Yeah.
You know, I would be like, are you kind of gay? Like, you can have the real thing. You got a wife. She wants to have sex with you, but you don't. Like that's weird.
Yeah. But
is it not weird?
It is, but there is some, I think there is some truth to what he said, that it is easier. Like, it's easier to what's easier? Going out for fast food or making a meal at home from scratch?
Yeah.
Which one's better for you?
Right.
Like,
right.
it's the homemade meal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's easier. It's tempting to go and just drive through and get the food. It's already made.
Mm.
Right. It's the same with porn, I think. Like it's hard to be in a relationship. Marriage is hard.
Mm.
You got to talk to each other. Like you have to put forth effort in listening to each other. You have to serve each other. The kids are, you come home and the kids are misbehaving and your wife is exhausted and you it's hard.
Yeah.
Porn is easy.
Yeah.
It's fast food sex.
And that's what he had convinced himself, I think. Though it's different talking to a non-believer than a believer, but he, in his mind, thought that this was better or good.
Right.
And I think what you're elaborating on is what the Bible does is it's only good. It's only a good gift in marriage.
Right. We think it's good outside of marriage. The world will tell you that it's good. It's something to be pursued.
Yeah.
Even pornography is not really a taboo subject anymore. People talk about it pretty openly. It's not something that is shameful, really, in our society anymore. But is it good? Is it good? The world will treat sex in an amoral way.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just a bodily function.
That was a good point that you made.
It's just like eating.
You said it was amoral. I knew what you meant, but explain to people what you mean by amoral. The world views sex as amoral.
Well, moral is good.
Mm-hmm.
In a spiritual sense, like before God, moral is good, immoral is bad, amoral is it's indifferent.
It's nothing moral.
There's nothing moral to it, right?
Yeah.
It's like eating. Like it's not immoral to eat fast food, right?
Or to be a vegetarian.
Or be a vegetarian. That's a little dicey, Jay.
Yeah.
But the world treats sex in an amoral way.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad. It's like eating. When you get hungry,
whatever
it's not a moral issue.
Yeah.
You can eat what you want to eat. And they treat sex the same way. Like when you have the desire, just satisfy your hunger. And there's nothing bad about it.
Right.
And that's why they will treat sex in just a casual throwaway way. But they really cheapen it. They're lowering it because it's only good in marriage. And so if you are engaging in any kind of sexual activity outside of marriage, you may think that it's good. You may like the guy you were talking about, with all his sexual conquests. They think that, like, the world thinks that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what it means to be a man. That's what you want to look back on. But what they're actually doing is they're cheapening sex.
Mm-hmm.
They're lowering it. They're demeaning themselves. They're demeaning other people, and they're not actually experiencing the true joy and satisfaction that God designed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the culture we live in.
It is, and
we have to fight back against that.
What's that one quote? It's in reference to I believe actual conversion. So it's not in reference to sex, but it really does apply. Where he's like, most people are content to play in the mud, make mud pies.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah,
instead of going to a holiday at the beach.
When God has a holiday for you at the beach,
mm-hmm.
And this is the same thing.
Yeah. Nancy Pearcey, a quote that I couldn't read in the sermon. Nancy Pearcey has what is the book? Love Your Body, I think is what it's called. It's all about the sexual culture. And she says some may think sexual hedonism, doing whatever you want for pleasure, gives sex too much importance, but in reality it gives sex too little importance. It treats the body as nothing more than a physical organism driven by physical urges. It treats sex as a strictly physical act isolated from the rich inner life of the whole person. Thus, it deprives sex of its depth by detaching it from its meaning as self-giving between a man and a woman committed to building an entire life together. Right.
It's such a foreign idea, though, in our culture. And it is a great a great way for Christians to be light in the world, light in a dark place, is to have a marriage and be committed to it for life, for the long haul.
Right.
You know, people will, and I'm sure the same with you. When you meet different people, and they're like, "Oh, how long you guys been married?" And you're like, 23 years, and they're like, "What? What?" Like, yeah, we got married when we were young. Like, this isn't as weird as you guys are making it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is weird though to the culture.
Well, the thing is that marriage is going to go through seasons. Like it's not going to always be the honeymoon. You're going to come back to the real world. you're gonna have work. You're gonna have responsibilities and bills, and then kids, and there's all kinds of difficulties that can arise. And what the world does, and we're kind of skipping to the divorce part of the passage, but the world will enter into that difficult season, and they'll just get a divorce.
Yeah, I mean, it's over.
Like you won't.
Yeah.
Like, well, the love is gone. They'll talk about falling in love, and they'll talk about falling out of love.
Yeah.
And like they're just being driven by their desires. They're just being driven by whatever they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But if you talk to people that have gone through like deep valleys of hard times, and they come out on the other side, that they're committed to each other, and they say, "We're going to stick this out because that's the vow I made." They're happy.
Yeah.
Like they're happier. People that are getting divorces, they're not as happy as these people that are actually going through difficulties together, and they come out on the other side. Because their bonds are stronger because they've gone through this together, and they have not just expressed verbally their commitment, they've actually shown it with their actions. I am with you to the end.
Right.
You can't manufacture that. Like you're not going to find like your soulmate, like the one, like this mythical person that you're never going to have any problems with. Like that person doesn't exist. Like we're sinners. And so you made a covenant commitment till death do us part. Keep your covenant. Keep your commitment.
Yeah.
And God will bless that.
Indeed.
But the temptation is for to seek sexual satisfaction outside of marriage. And so it's good for us. We're talking about it a little bit in our community group about the need for the community, the church community to be around each other and to encourage and strengthen each other, because the temptations are all around us. And it's good to be reminded that you're not the only one that's being tempted with this.
Yeah.
You're not the only person that, especially when it comes to like people struggling with pornography. Like instead of treating this as like this hush hush thing, it's good for us to be honest and say, this is something that probably most guys have struggled with at some point in their life. And so it's good to know that there actually is freedom.
Right.
Like you don't have to be enslaved to this. There's no temptation that you're facing that other people haven't faced. And God's faithful. He'll provide a way out so that you can escape the temptation. And there are people in not just this church, just churches in general that have found freedom from sexual sin. They know the freedom of repentance and trusting in Christ, and we need each other.
Yeah, and these are things you're going to want to be talking to your kids about when they're very young, because I think it's like 10 years old for boys. Most of them have been exposed to pornography by the time they're 10, and this is not like just a like say, well, my kids don't go to public school. That's not going to happen to them. Well, they live in the modern world, right, and it's still going to happen. And girls too. It's a little bit older for girls, but before they're both 13, and once that happens, that temptation is going to be there, right? It's going to be there always there in the back of their mind that that's something that they could get access to probably if they want to sneak enough. So it's better to be having these conversations with your kids when they're young, unfortunately now the world has forced it upon you very young. But you've got to take that initiative to try to protect your children.
Yeah. Right. And it's also, so in the context of the passage, he's talking to people who aren't married. He transitions to single people or widows, and he says, "I'm as a concession, not as a command. I wish that everyone was like me. I wish they were all single." And there's a debate over was Paul a widow? Did his wife leave him when he became a Christian? Like there's all kinds of conjecture because he was a Pharisee. It'd be a little weird if he hadn't been married. But anyway, he's single now, and he wants everyone to remain single as he is. That's his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can't remain single without falling into sexual sin, then he says it's better for them to marry than to burn with passion.
Which is most people.
Yeah, I mean, singleness is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
He says everyone's got their gift.
And I would say
there
probably
are single
rare.
people. There are people that have the gift of singleness. There's people that have no desire to get married.
Yeah,
they're perfectly happy, and they don't struggle with sexual temptation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gift from God. For the rest of us, we don't have that, right? And so he says again, he's dealing with the Corinthian bad theology of like, well, you don't want to get married because you're a Christian.
Which is so weird.
It's so weird. And so he's telling them, like, it's okay. He'll say later in chapter 7, if you marry, it's not a sin.
Wild.
Yeah. But it's good to stress the fact that marriage is not going to be the silver bullet to kill your sexual sin.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're looking at pornography and then you get married, there's not going to be like some kind of switch. And now, I don't ever want to look at pornography.
Mm-hmm.
Like because the issue is your heart, and marriage is not going to fix your heart. If you're selfish before you get married, you're going to be selfish after you're married.
Yeah.
And the only difference is now you've dragged someone else into your selfishness, and you're going to hurt that person too. And so the point Paul is making is not marriage is going to fix your heart problem. He's just saying it's okay to get married. Like it's not a sin. You can. There's nothing super spiritual about remaining single.
Mm-hmm.
But we know from Jesus' teaching and Paul's teaching elsewhere that the real problem is the heart. And so you don't need if you're looking for your spouse to be your savior, that's a weight that they simply can't hold. They can't support that.
Right.
You need to repent and trust Jesus. And while you're single, you need to do that. Right? Don't look for this godly person to save you from looking at pornography. Repent and obey Christ and be the kind of person that a godly man or woman wants to marry.
Yeah.
Right. Why would someone want to marry you if you're looking at pornography? And if you find someone and they're like, that's fine. That's not a person you want to marry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like be a godly person that a godly woman wants to marry.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of leads us into the last point, really.
Yeah.
That sex is not the ultimate good.
Mm.
Sex is not the ultimate good.
Yeah. So he talks about divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to remember the context. Again, this is not in a vacuum. He's not just going through like bullet points. He's still talking about the fact that they've got this hyper spirituality, and so they're either abstaining from sex in marriage, or if they can't abstain, they're getting divorced, which again is wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And in you can almost imagine it as they're trying to pursue this super spirituality. They've made everything about sex. Like this has to be on their minds 24/7.
Mm.
They're married, and don't get too close to me. Right? like it has to be just all consuming. I can't stop thinking about sex, so we better get divorced.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah, and so they've made marriage all about sex. We can do the same thing. We can make marriage all about sex. Like the sexual relationship is what marriage is about. And if we do that, then we have set up sex as an idol.
Mm.
We've made it into a false god.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that very easily. And so
Yeah, I mean,
the only reason I'm getting married is so I can have sex.
yeah, this
Like
has
that's a bad I mean, it's good to want to have sex with
Yeah.
the person you're marrying, but if that's the only reason, that false god is not going to satisfy you.
yeah,
Like the newness is going to wear off.
yeah,
Right? The excitement's going to wear off, and now I've got to find someone else to satisfy my sexual desires with.
yeah. I mean, one day, like if you don't die and God blesses you both with a long life, you're going to grow old together, and maybe like you're in your 80s.
Yeah.
Well, if all your relationship was sex,
Mm-hmm.
like you're not even gonna like this person you're with now.
Yeah.
You're like, who are you? You're just we can't have sex anymore. Like, what are we doing now? Like,
Let's get a divorce.
yeah, 80-year-olds.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, what if your spouse gets sick
Or injured.
yeah, they can't have sex anymore. What if your spouse dies? Like if the marriage was all about sex, well, now you don't have an outlet for that, and sexual immorality, the temptation's going to be right there, right?
Something that we talked about in our community group is pretty amazing to think about. Is they're trying to trip Jesus up, and you mentioned it in your sermon. Suppose a man has a wife and he dies, and she marries his brother,
Right.
and then he dies and marries his brother, and you go on like seven times.
Yeah.
So she's had 7 husbands. Who's
is she?
in the resurrection?
Yeah.
Is it in the resurrection?
Uh-huh.
Right, in the
Well,
resurrection.
yeah.
Who's her husband,
Right.
or whose wife is she?
Yeah.
And he says, you don't understand that in the resurrection that they're neither given in marriage, or can't remember the terminology now exactly, but they're like the angels.
They neither marry nor are given in marriage.
Yeah, neither married, given in marriage. They're like the angels.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that, and so we're not going to have sex. Sex is like the best thing we can think of in the created world, right? How much better must the new creation be in heaven to be in God's presence than our reality, to where we would be like, I don't even miss sex.
Yeah.
Like what? Like I don't think you're not gonna know we were married, right?
Right. I don't
Like-
think you have less knowledge.
Like, well, I'll look and be like, oh, it's it's my old wife. We had a whole life together and raised children. And of course, probably we'll be closer
Mm-hmm.
than other people in the new world. But the fact that we'll be like, no sex here is not a problem. That means that to be there must transcend anything that we really understand about pleasure.
Mm.
It must so far surpass it that it's not even a thing.
Right.
That's amazing to think about.
I like this quote from Ray Ortlund. Is he still safe to?
I don't know.
There's so many.
You never
people
know
that I'm like-
nowadays.
I'm like, I don't know. I've got Tim Keller quotes on here. I've got. It's like, well, I don't know. But Ray Ortlund, he said, the promises of God can outperform the amusements and even the therapies of this world in keeping our souls and our marriages alive. The key to lasting romance is not endless sex, but believing hearts.
Yeah.
And I like that because the world tells you endless sex, like that's the ultimate. Like if you can have
Right.
sex every single day, what could be better?
The-
Well, the Bible tells us that
Yeah.
sex is not. It's not It's not the ultimate good. It's not the ultimate satisfaction for you. You're not made just to have sex. Like you're not a sex animal.
Right.
Like you are created for Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and He is the ultimate.
Yeah. He's ultimate good.
And so God gives this good gift of sex to people, fallen people, for our benefit, our
Mhm.
joy here on this earth. But it's not meant to be our primary pursuit,
Yeah.
because it's we're made for something better.
Mm. Isn't it amazing to kind of think about that? The ultimate good, Christ, to know Him, to be with Him forever,
Ti-
is
Tim Keller, he's got a book on marriage,
okay.
and even though he anyway, we've got problems with Timothy Keller, but that doesn't mean everything he says is wrong. He says some good stuff, and this is a good quote. He says, "Marriage, therefore, is penultimate. It points to the real marriage that our soul needs. Even the best marriage cannot by itself fill the void in our souls left by God."
Yeah.
Like our momentary marriage, which is a good book by John Piper, our momentary marriage is meant to point us to the ultimate marriage that we actually were created for. So don't make your marriage here ultimate. You're looking forward to the actual thing,
Yeah.
like the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
This marriage with sex, with the sexual relationship, is temporary.
And
It's going to pass away. It's not going to last forever. Look for the marriage that's going to last forever.
yeah. And though it's very good, which God says, it's not the ultimate.
Right.
There's something better.
Yeah. Jim Neuheiser again, he says, if you're obsessed with your personal sexual desires and if you become angry when you don't get what you think you need, you become a sexual idolater. Like you are worshiping the gift rather than the giver. And in that way, you're going to lower sex. Like it no longer is what it's intended for. And I love this Calvin quote. I won't read it again, but he talks about using the gifts to help us through this world. Don't abuse the gifts to cling to this world. Like we're not meant for this world. We're meant for another world. And sex is in marriage in this world, but it's not the ultimate good that we're supposed to cling to.
Yeah.
So look to Christ.
That's
Look
good
to Christ
stuff, man.
and let love your spouse to the glory of God.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. All right. That was a good long one. We had to break these microphones in, though.
That's right.
Nice. Well, George, I will not be available next Text Driven Tuesday, but maybe you and Philip can do it.
You want us to just do it without you?
You can do it without me again. I think you guys probably have a great time. Oh, they did a sex count. They said, is this in this podcast? I said sex 59 times. You said it 119 times.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh,
But it was your sermon.
those are still pretty rookie numbers.
Yeah. So we're going to be in Deuteronomy 6 next week, and we're looking at parenting. How should Christians parent their children and raise them up to follow the Lord? And I think God's got some really good stuff to tell us here. Of course, you shouldn't come and look at this and say, if I do all these things, everything's going to work out perfect with my kids.
Right.
Because there are people, many, who will testify that they have, and they've had multiple kids, and several of them will follow the Lord, and maybe one of them won't. So I don't want people to have that expectation. But that's what we're looking at, Deuteronomy chapter 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, all right, Giorgio.
Hopefully this has been a beneficial series for people.
Yeah.
And again, just an encouragement to our church that if you need to talk to an elder, come and talk to us.
Yeah.
We would rather help people who are having marriage problems early than after everything blows up, trying to put the pieces back together.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right, thanks for tuning in today for this podcast, this special podcast on the theme of planet Earth, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
the theme of the Earth. God's plan for sex is good, and hopefully you've seen that from this passage and got some practical ideas and understand better what God's Word says about this. Hopefully the whole series has been helpful as we've been looking at the Christian family really this whole summer. Then after that ends, we'll have a couple of sermons we have before the end of the summer, and then we'll be back in Romans in like September. So we've got some other stuff planned. So hopefully this is beneficial and helps you to be conformed more into the image of Christ. If it has, please give us a like, subscribe, share, maybe write us a review. You can download our app, Christ Fellowship Church app. You can get the sermons there, the podcast there, other materials. Hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.